The road to Qatar is a misnomer, as it implies there is only one route to the World Cup, when in fact there are many. Some much more treacherous than others. Today, Jimmy, Conrad, and I will discuss how qualification varies from one confederation to another, and then we'll be going down our nostalgia mode to build our all-time greatest USMNT starting 11. The Qué Golazo USMNT Hour begins right now. Hello, everyone. If you are watching this live on YouTube, you know the drill. Help us get this video in front of more eyeballs by smashing the like button and subscribing to the channel. Smash it. It's free, and it can serve as your good deed for the day. You can do other good deeds if you like to do more than one, but that could be one if that's all you want to do. And also, we want to hear from you, so get in the comment section, share your thoughts, ask a question, get things off your chest. Attack Jimmy, Conrad. I'll stick up for him, though, because Jimmy and I are in pretty good terms right now, so we can agree on most things, and we're fighting for each other. And don't forget to subscribe to the Qué Golazo podcast wherever you get your podcasts. And if you have a minute, leave a review. 5 stars is great. Leave a comment on it. Say something nice about us. We're heading into the holidays. Have that holiday spirit. Make sure everybody feels that sort of love coming from you. So anyways, Jimmy, Conrad, what's going on, man?
What's up? I'm excited to get into this topic because as much as we like it to be about the U.S. men's national team, there's some things that are going on outside of that with regard to World Cup qualifying that is very intriguing, that could have implications for the U.S. men's national team. So I'm excited to dive into this today, to waddle into the warm waters of this particular subject. I brought my trunks and my flip-flops ready to go.
I haven't seen you waddle before, Jimmy, so I'd love to see you waddle into the waters. But listen, I've actually got this Argentina jersey up behind me. Here's my humble brag. We're about a minute and a half in. This is actually I traded shirts with Kun Aguero. Put this up because obviously Lionel Messi wins the Ballon d'Or, which I think he was robbed from. That's not what this show is about. This show is about the fact that, one, Ben Jacobs, who I had on, Jimmy, on an emergency pod for Qué Golazo, talking about when is there going to be Americans on this short list and who it's going to be. But we'll talk about that in a little bit. Let's talk first about the draws, right? So Friday's draw at the FIFA HQ in Zurich, Switzerland. By the way, we haven't talked about this yet, Jimmy, which we should at some point too. Potentially FIFA HQ moving to the U.S. But anyways, that's not about what we're talking about right now either. The 4th place finisher, what we found out from that draw, is that the 4th place finisher in the Octagonal, in the Ocho, will play an Oceania side, the winner of Oceania, for a spot in the World Cup. And it's one game, by the way. Oceania is the weakest team in all the confederations, right? You're really talking about New Zealand, and then you've got a number of teams below that are favorable in terms of who we want to play.
It should be the Kiwis. The Kiwis, when you look at Oceania, no disrespect to Tahiti, amongst other teams, but New Zealand should come out of that as... And we know some Kiwis. We played with and against a lot of them in MLS, so it'll be interesting to see how they perform. But it's looking like at the moment they'll play against Panama because they're going up against the 4th best team in Concacaf, which I think would be a pretty tasty affair, all things considered.
I agree. Very different styles of play. I feel like the Kiwis would match up better against the U.S. in terms of style of play and preparation. We've obviously known a number of players that have played for the Kiwis, New Zealand, over the years, and I think the matchup is very different when you're playing against a Central American side. If you're the Kiwis, obviously the 5th place finisher in CONMEBOL will take on an Asian nation. So that's an interesting one as well. And again, the format being that it's a one-off playoff at a neutral venue, which I find bizarre, considering the fact that, I like my odds against New Zealand over 2 matches. Now, one match, I don't like my odds against anybody if I'm in a national team game, because you don't know. There's so much at stake. A neutral venue. What's that crowd going to be like at a neutral venue? What's the pitch going to be like? Could a team really get up for it? We've seen these, movies are written about these types of things. So it's certainly going to be something. I think the U.S. are safe from that for now. I certainly wouldn't want to travel somewhere around the world to a neutral venue to take on likely New Zealand.
I wouldn't either, but Mexico fell into this for the 2014 World Cup, where they played New Zealand, if I'm not mistaken, over 2 legs, and they smoked them. But they were fortunate that that rule was in place, and that they were fortunate to play the Oceania representative instead of CONMEBOL or Asia even, because it would have been a much stiffer test. And we did them a solid, Mexico, by scoring some vital goals. Sanzusi for them even getting 4th, if everybody remembers. Everybody, recency bias. Everything thinks, oh, Mexico always makes it, but they were so close to not making it in 2014. So getting Oceania is a big deal for anybody in CONCACAF, because it would have been harder, especially if you played CONMEBOL. That would have been very difficult, because that's looking like it could be Chile or Peru or Colombia could fall into there. I mean, there's Ecuador. I mean, there's some options there that could be very, very difficult in a one-off at a neutral site. So I'm feeling pretty good that whoever comes out of CONCACAF should do the business against New Zealand in a one-off. I do feel like, though, that it's because it's a one-off, I think that might actually give New Zealand more of a chance. Had it been two games, I feel like the quality of a team from CONCACAF or CONMEBOL or whoever would have probably really shown their quality over the 180 minutes. But over 90, anything can happen.
Yeah, 90's a tough one, man. And look, there was just a comment on the screen that was talking about it could be any one of the top four. Obviously, Jimmy was talking about the fact that right now that is Panama and
Yes.
where they sit.
Yes.
It of course could be any one of the top four because it's wide open. There's plenty of games left for finishing fourth, and it really only takes. And this is why I like the U.S. in their next window. Right? They have El Salvador at home. They have Honduras at home. Canada away. That's going to really set the table for where they finish and whether they're still in that I think you get a good result in that window and you're not in that fourth place finish conversation anymore. But I will say this, and I'm just going to say it confidently. With the U.S. getting Oceania in that playoff or anybody in CONCACAF should beat New Zealand. New Zealand are ranked 110 in the world. Obviously, we've seen New Zealand in the past. They've had a number of players go to play to bigger clubs. Ryan Nelson being one that stands out to me, who's now a player.
Simon Elliott.
Simon Elliott, another fantastic player, top level player that's been coaching in the ranks around USL and other circles. And so there's a number of quality players that play at New Zealand. I don't want to write them off, but when I'm thinking of the U.S. or I'm thinking about CONCACAF and where the CONCACAF is, and any other way that you could have been drawn in, you could have been drawn into CONMEBOL, which again, don't love the odds at all. 1 off, 2 off. It's still a much bigger match. Anybody from CONCACAF should beat New Zealand, and that is just if you're top 4 in CONCACAF, you should beat New Zealand to go to a World Cup. That's I don't really have a hot take on that or anything like that. I just believe that to be true. I believe the quality of CONCACAF in the top 4 is better than the number 1 in Oceania being likely New Zealand. And if it wasn't New Zealand, then it's 110%.
Yeah, what I would say really quick is I agree with you. I did see a comment that don't sleep on Jamaica. We're not. I think we all want to see the Reggae Boys do well in CONCACAF and clearly have a ton of quality in their team. There is one player, though, that when New Zealand eventually makes it to this spot, they have Chris Wood, who plays for Burnley. He's got 27 goals and 60 caps for the Kiwis. He's pretty solid. Then you have a couple other players. Got somebody in Chicago Fire, Elliot Collier. You have somebody who plays for Torino, 19 years old, Matthew Garbett. They got a nice mix of Michael Boxall, plays for Minnesota. They got some guys that have some experience and a nice mix of some young and some olds. But to your point, I think that most of the teams in CONCACAF, or at least the team that finishes in fourth, because it's looking like U.S., Canada, and Mexico will be getting the top 3. It's going to be a battle for that 4th spot. Panama still has a lot of work to do, and I don't think it's a guarantee in a one-off. Over 2 legs, I think CONCACAF could really show their quality, but 1 leg with maybe Chris Wood decides to play the best game of his Kiwi career, you're talking about something different. And especially when you know it's at stake. Like if you're the favorite going into a game of that magnitude, sometimes the pressure is overwhelming. It's overwhelming that you should win this game because it's just New Zealand. And you've been in those situations before. I mean, even when we were the U.S., we'd go play quote unquote a minnow. And remember, were you out there when we played against Haiti in the 2009 Gold Cup?
Yes.
So we played against Haiti. We should
went
beat
down to
those
the last.
guys.
Went down to the last minute for us. We would have played Mexico in the semis if we didn't score in the last minute of that game. Jay Heath got eaten alive in that game in his own stadium, if you remember that correctly.
Yes, no, I remember that. But Stu Holden had to score in like the 93rd minute for us to draw 2-2, and Haiti scored 2 very good goals. So you could run into that situation where all of a sudden New Zealand decides to play their best ever game. But when you know that a spot to go to the World Cup is at stake, anything that you thought you experienced before, it's not going to be anything like that game. There's going to be so much. These guys are going to be running in a way they've never run before. They're never going to get tired. And how do you handle that when you're supposed to be the team that wins? So this isn't just isolated to Oceania. This is for all these games that are coming up. And because I wanted to talk to you about Europe. Let's like tap dance over into that area.
Real quick, Jimmy, before you get to Europe, let me just clarify for a few people that are asking, is the OFC qualifying done? No, it's not. It hasn't even started yet. So Tonga has to play the Cook Islands on the 14th of March. They will then, the winner of that will then go into pot 2 to make up the 8 teams that will then play for a winning spot where they play tournament style, where it goes, semifinals to like a quarterfinal to a semifinal to a final that one would then take on the teams in that, by the way, Solomon Islands, Tahiti, Vanuatu, and then again, as I mentioned, the winner of the Tonga versus Cook Islands. And then in the other group, New Zealand, New Caledonia, Fiji, and Papua New Guinea. So for all intents and purposes, and this is not a disrespect to some of these developing soccer nations, it's just that once Australia left Oceania and went to Asia, it became New Zealand's half bid almost always. And again, just like we're talking about a single game, New Zealand could mess up somewhere along the way and be beat by a team that are probably a developing nation, but are probably trying to recruit dual nationals and things like that. We saw with AJ De La Garza playing for, what was it? Was it Guam, I believe he was playing for?
That's right.
Or
That's right.
You know, Zarek Valentin playing for Puerto Rico. We're seeing a number of players being recruited by other nations now as dual nationals, so there could be a factor there. But for all intents and purposes, it should be New Zealand that a team in CONCACAF is preparing to play against in that match. Sorry, to go to Europe. Just wanted to clarify for everyone that qualifying hasn't even started yet, but they are a huge range of quality in that qualifying region.
Well, let's talk about then. Let's just stay in Asia really quick and talk about Australia, who did make the move from Oceania over to Asia. Now, there's 2 groups of 6, so everybody knows the third round of qualifying, and you have to finish in the top 2 to automatically qualify, and then that next best team goes into the playoff against CONMEBOL. As it stands right now, Iran and South Korea would go from Group A, and Saudi Arabia and Japan would go from Group B. Australia would be that 5th best team, and they would take on Peru at this very moment in a one-off to go to the World Cup.
Wow.
That's insane. And
Australia are not the Australia that they were 4, 5, 6 years ago when Tim Cahill was leading that nation. They're kind of in a rebuild right now where they don't have any huge stars. They got some good young players playing throughout the world, but nobody that's really standing out as their big star.
Yeah, it's going to be that game for me because Australia has 11 points as it stands. Japan has 12. So that could flip-flop. Japan could fall into that 5th spot because in the other group, Iran and South Korea are clear. They're going to qualify for the World Cup. Saudi Arabia's got 16 in Group B. Japan has 12. Australia has 11. And really quick, Australia play Japan at home and then go to Saudi Arabia on the last day. So that Australia-Japan game should probably determine who gets 2nd or 3rd, which is crazy. So you could have a Japan fall into that and maybe play a Colombia, which would be nuts. It would feel very Italy, Portugal-like. So let's now segue over to Europe. I wanted to get your thoughts on the Eurosnob, a perspective where there's 55 nations that are recognized by FIFA in Europe, and 13 of those go to the World Cup. And they're still crying over there that, Italy or Portugal can't just do the business in qualifying, you bastards. And this wouldn't even be an issue. That's one. But then when you look at Africa, which I think is the hardest region to qualify from, 54 countries in Africa are recognized by FIFA. Only 5, Heath, 5 of the 54 get to qualify for the World Cup. That is as cutthroat as it gets. I don't think it's as hard anywhere than Africa. Yeah. And they talk about losing. Ivory Coast couldn't even get out of their group, dude. So you're talking about these players. I don't know, man. 13 spots out of 55 is a lot. Plus, they already have their own competition called the Euros. So like, it's about the world, you Euro snobs. I don't know what your thoughts are on that.
No, look, when I'm looking at Europe, right, the whole point of the Euros is for the Euros. And nobody wants, I think, what did they say in the last quarterfinals? There were 6 teams from Europe in the last quarterfinals of the World Cup. I think it was, where people are like, well, you're already making it the Euros again. And again, that's due to strength, but you get the Euros. So just be the best in Europe then. But when it comes to the World Cup, there is an argument to having more teams included. Now, we saw the flip side for me is looking at it through the lens of a powerhouse nation that is our U.S. women's national team, right? When you look at that and you say, okay, you've got Mexico didn't make the World Cup, okay? Mm-hmm. Then you've got Canada, great team. So when you're CONCACAF, the argument is there should be more teams from CONCACAF going to a World Cup on the women's side. When we're looking at it from the women's angle, you're like, yeah, but I mean, Thailand, whatever it was, 13-0, that's a World Cup nation that should qualify. And so I understand it from this elitist perspective of where you have more teams and more strengths. Ultimately, teams fall short that are good enough to compete in a World Cup, but don't qualify, right? And so that's the lens I try to look through when I hear other nations or I hear Europe arguing, because when I think through the lens of the U.S. or you think about CONCACAF, you go, well, there's quality here. There's quality in other regions on the women's side. Mm-hmm. And so I can understand that in Europe, you have so much quality that you think because there are plenty of teams that won't qualify that could probably get out of the group stages in a World Cup from Europe and other nations. But
I also think about how hard it is for the women in the Olympics. Only 3 teams came from Europe. Spain wasn't there. Germany wasn't there. Like perennial powerhouses that just or emerging powerhouses, especially on the domestic scene that aren't getting in. So I don't know. Somebody said that, I think Brock said that South America is the hardest. There's no gimme games. And that's fair. Like it's hard. It's supposed to be hard for a reason. And
their format stays the same, right? It's 10 teams.
Yeah. Top 4 go
home and away.
And
that's like a 2-year process normally that you're grinding through that. And that's tough, right? There are no easy games, but you still get 4 and they get a 5th, right? 5th is a playoff.
Yeah. 5th is a playoff.
5th. Yeah. I mean, again, we get 3 and a 4th is a playoff. And so, on an octagonal, I certainly think South America is harder to get through, especially because of the elements. And again, I don't think anything is, you go to any sort of outside of Europe, you go to any other qualifying region. And I would say Africa, I would say CONMEBOL, I would say Concacaf, all have certain challenges that you have to face that have nothing to do with the quality of the team that you're playing against in terms of elevation, in terms of altitude, in terms of climate, in terms of, we're talking about January in Hamilton, Ontario for the US in a crazy, crazy freezing blizzard snow type of game, potentially. Not to say that Europe, because Europe has plenty of places that you got to go to, but typically those infrastructures are built to being into indoor arenas or turf pitches that are heated, things like that. It just, I'm not for or against Europe's arguments. I can understand them, but each region has their own challenges. And when you talked about Africa, Jimmy, how many was it? 54 or something recognized?
54 recognized. Only 5 make it.
That's crazy.
It's crazy.
Yeah, and just to go through rounds to get to the final round of qualifying is crazy. So I can understand that. Jimmy, let me ask you this.
Shoot.
Do you think this news changes anything for the USMNT or any of the teams in CONCACAF in terms of who they're going to play against or how they play out? Do you think there's obviously seems like a calming presence to know that you're getting Oceania? Not to say that it's a walk in the park because, you don't show up on match day. You'll get beat by any national team anywhere. But do you think that there is a little bit more of a confidence in knowing that a 4th place finish probably isn't the worst thing in the world as it could have been if you played CONMEBOL or if you played against Asia?
100%. I think that 4th position now in CONCACAF, and right now Canada's on top of 16, USA second with 15. Mexico and Panama are tied with 14 points, but Mexico's got the tiebreakers in their favor. So I guess Mexico could fall into that 4th spot, and already seeing some comments about how they're tired of Mexico's arrogance. They hope they don't qualify. That sounds a bit harsh. I mean, I want not to say I'm pulling for Mexico, but I like some CONCACAF representation, and I do appreciate them getting out of their group and losing in the round of 16 for 5 consecutive World Cups. That's something special. I know you can come back at me. Well, you got to qualify for the World Cup. I get it. Okay, I'm just going to try to throw some shade at our rivals, but the question, I guess, ultimately is, does CONCACAF deserve 4 spots at the World Cup? And sure, I mean, if I think Panama's playing pretty well, and Jamaica has shown signs of playing pretty well, and if Costa Rica can figure out how to score, why not? They're a team. We're a region, I feel like, that you don't really want to play anybody from our region.
But also, this is the last time. It'll never be this way again. We are increasing the amount of teams that go into a World Cup, and then we're hosting the next one. So you got 3 teams automatically in, but you're increasing the numbers. Qualifying will forever change, and I think it'll be a long time until we see. Here's a question for you, Jimmy.
Yeah.
On that, do you think that it's the World Cup in itself? The responsibility is to increase the global relevance of the sport. We're talking about going from 32 to 48 teams or whatever it is. 48 teams, right? And that's going to be spread out. I would presume it'll be spread out. Probably equally across the different qualifying regions. I'm all for
Mozambique qualifying for a World Cup. That sounds amazing.
I mean, we're at a certain point, you're going to see a guarantee in Oceania, maybe 2 half spots. I don't know how it's going to work, but if you're increasing by that many, eventually you're going to reach a point where the quality drops, and you're going to sacrifice the quality of the tournament or the competition, depending on the draw, for the growth of the sport. I mean, are you hell bent on 32?
The counter argument is that by giving these smaller nations, or nations not necessarily smaller, but giving them a chance to actually compete, that will help them invest more in their infrastructure so that they
Yeah.
can compete. I think the women's game is probably the best example we have of it, that all of a sudden there were a few countries that took it very seriously and invested in their infrastructure and won a lot of the World Cups. The US is one of those. And now the rest of those countries are starting to catch up, investing more time and money into the sport, which is a great thing. And now it's becoming more competitive. Imagine if that money was being invested in different areas of the world. Who's to say that those countries couldn't go out there and compete? I don't know if they're not going to win, but they can compete. And then we look at these countries that are usually some of the favorites.
Canada men's
Canada's a good example
one
too,
where like they've got the Canadian Premier League, they've got Major League Soccer markets now. They had an investment into the infrastructure of teams there. And in just some years, while we've all been focused on the US and Mexico, Canada have risen and emerged. Not just from that, because they've got, dual nationals and other things, but they're increasing the tentacles out that are going to improve the infrastructure and improve the overall quality that they put on the field.
Yeah, that's another good example. And on the men's and women's side, ultimately, right? They finally beat the women, the U.S. women in the Olympics. They went on to win the gold medal on the women's side. Super impressive. And then you have the men that are doing similarly good things. Now they have to qualify still for their first World Cup since 1986, but it looks like they're going to be doing that. And they've got some tremendous talent, some talent that's considered world-class. Jonathan David leads Liga in scoring. Alphonso Davies considered one of the best outside backs, wing backs in the world. And I think that's just the start of a really bright future for Canadian soccer, as it were. So, yeah, it's interesting.
Where do you rank CONCACAF in terms of
regions?
Difficulty in qualifying for a men's World Cup? You've got Asia, you've got CONMEBOL, you've got CAF, Africa, you've got
I think
Europe.
Africa's probably the toughest.
You think so? Just based on numbers? I mean, you still have always the, Cameroon, Senegal, South Africa, Ivory Coast, Ghana, Nigeria.
But with the emergence of Egypt,
I guess North Africans,
and Algeria, with Riyad Mahrez and just these players that are starting to really carry their teams.
Right. That's a solid argument.
There's a lot of North African teams that are good, and you have the Nigerias, the Ivory Coast. Ivory Coast is out. Ghana, Senegal. You have South Africa, who's also out already. It's intense, and they have a couple rounds. You have 40? I don't know. I think 44 teams or 28 teams start, and then they go through a two-legged affair, and then they join groups, and they play in the groups. Only one team advanced from the 10 groups, and then they play in those 5 two-legged affairs. I mean, it's intense, man. And so it just feels like that might be the toughest region to get through. I know the Europeans are going to be like, well, it's us, but you get 13 spots. Also, when I look at UEFA qualifying, they're always like, oh, it's so difficult. Like, you play Luxembourg and Azerbaijan and Kosovo and Georgia. I'm sorry, Sweden, you should beat Georgia. You lost 2-0, which really cost you your spot. You got Lithuania, and it's just not like it's not like there's, and to the point about South America, every game, there's no gimme games. And I feel like there's still gimme games, potentially even in CONCACAF now that we've expanded it from 6 to 8. And also in Europe, there's gimme games as well. I mean, England beat San Marino, 11-0 or something? I mean, that's ridiculous. So I don't know. I just feel like Africa feels like the hardest region. We could argue, though, Oceania is, because even if you win your region, you not even qualify automatically. You still have to go into a playoff against a team that's probably pretty good to make that happen. I don't know. That's a difficult question. I wonder what everybody thinks in the chat. Let us know, and then hit us up on Twitter at Qué Golazo Pod.
Yeah, I agree with that. Make sure you guys are keeping these comments coming. They're actually coming so quick from our producer Des that they're hard to stay up with. There was a question though about how is this any different, the 48 team World Cup, than how you do qualifying for the group stages of the Champions League. So the way that the format works is 3 teams play in a group, and there's 16 groups of 3, and then the top 2 from those groups will then go into a 32. Yeah, and it changes dramatically the way in which you prepare for a group stage, right? And seeding and all of that stuff. And again, thanks, James, for that question. I think it's a great question of how that's any different than qualifying. It's so you would play two games, right, in your group, and then you go into the round of 32. Is that how it works? Or is it a group stage?
Round of 32. No, round of 32.
Yeah, round of 32, and then it's knockout the rest of the way, right?
It's still 7 games to win a World Cup. It's just changed the format. So it becomes almost a little bit more March Madness-esque except you eliminate the round of 64. You just have the group stages to, and I feel like that happens to really try to eliminate, you know, the happy to be there teams.
Yeah, but the argument is this: when you get into 3-team groups, the argument is like the collusion was what the big argument was, right? Of teams being able to play another team out based on collusion of only 3 teams being like, hey, you and me, let's just make sure that we
draw,
we're gonna get through this, and then we just, you know, hope for whatever. And that's some of the criticisms that came with 48 teams and 3-team groups and things like that.
It could happen,
but yeah, it could happen. I mean, anything could happen.
We'll have to wait and see.
Yeah. But it
looks like Heath is frozen, everybody. And what I love,
am I back?
You're back. You're back.
Cool.
Your face was amazing. Keep going.
Was it? Yeah. No. Go ahead for you. Go ahead for you. Whatever you're gonna say. I deserve to be frozen for a moment.
No. I just wanted to bring this up because I think it's interesting part of the conversation. But Bloomberg just had an article about if the World Cup happens every 2 years, that would take away $9 billion from UEFA and the domestic leagues that would have to, you know, obviously rework their schedules and their own domestic competitions or even the European competitions. And now I understand a little bit more as to why FIFA is pushing that, because then they can control more of the pie, as it were. And right now, maybe UEFA gets too much of the pie because the Champions League, etc., you know, earns so much money for them. I'm curious about that because they're always going to, you know, wave the flag of, we're just trying to grow the game. Okay, we're just trying to grow the game, everybody. We've expanded it to 48 teams, which for me, when I think about it from a financial perspective, just means we can sell more TV rights to more places around the world. Different well, maybe it's the same conversation. And then if they do it every 2 years, they can just control more of that, but still play it or still kind of create that narrative under the banner of, oh, we're doing it to grow the game. That's our whole motto, is to grow the game, you know. And I don't know. It's interesting, and I wonder your thoughts on that and the pushback from UEFA. And
yeah, I think it's. I mean, it's. I think the pandemic in itself is starting to bring out the real greed in people, and not greed because of greed out of necessity, right? Because we've seen teams that have been poorly run, Barcelona being the one that we were all just like, Barcelona is the most beautiful thing that ever happened to the world. The way that they play, the style, the culture, it's connected to the Catholic Church. This is amazing. And then all of a sudden,
hold on, before you move on about Barcelona, you move from Barcelona, Messi pretty much won the award for Ballon d'Or playing with Barcelona and Argentina.
Yeah,
they have
shouldn't have
the women's player, right? Alexia Puñales, she won it, Barcelona player. Pedri, best young player in the world, Barcelona. So yeah, they're having all these issues, but they're still developing players. They're still doing something right. Just wanted to throw that out there. You know,
they are. But what I'm saying is the pandemic has kind of lifted the rug, so to speak, of teams that have been not mitigating risk or not being good at mitigating risk, that are just flying by the seat of their pants. And then one thing goes wrong and they go, we are in big, big trouble. Now, you don't presume you're going to have a pandemic every couple of years. In fact, these, you know, might happen once in a lifetime. But we saw a financial crisis before. We've seen all kinds of things that start to bring out the worst in these clubs and the worst in these leagues. We're starting to see the Bundesliga, for example, has shifted the way that they distribute money amongst those leagues. And I don't want to go too far off into all these things that don't matter. But the evolution of these things that's starting to distribute, the redistribution of wealth within these leagues is creating a little bit more stability for the ones that are doing it right. But others are becoming more greedy. So if you're a federation or a confederation or a governing body, you're thinking, you know, same thing for Concacaf. Concacaf's looking at, you know, whether it's She Believes Cup or other things like that, going, hey, that's money out of our pockets, right? We're the governing body for the region. We should be putting on a women's tournament or a women's league. We need more official competitions. We need Nations League. We need Gold Cup. We need all of these things because that helps us. So from their perspective, they're saying the more money CONCACAF can make, the more that I can go to the developing nations and help them build better infrastructure that's going to improve and create more opportunities for people across our region, right? In theory, in a perfect world. And then the national teams and other governing bodies are looking at it through the same lens. So it's not like there's a right or a wrong. Jimmy, just to shift the conversation a little bit, let me ask you this. You've got right now Mexico, US, Panama, Canada, right? Just working off of those 4 teams. Which of those teams do you think could qualify in another region? So you can put them in the same, if you think, or you can put them one in each of another region. do you think any of those teams could qualify in CONMEBOL, in Europe, in I mean, obviously Oceania, we'd get a half slot. I like our odds there. Africa or Asia, do you think any of these teams have the ability to play or compete at the style of play and and under the conditions of those regions? Do you think the US or any of these could qualify somewhere else?
This is a big hypothetical.
Oh yeah, big time.
And I appreciate it because it's fun to think about. And I'm curious what everybody thinks. Hit us up on Qué Golazo Pod on Twitter if you're listening, or hit us up on YouTube right now if you're watching. I would say that there are going to be a lot of haters out there like, no, they can't qualify anywhere. Concacaf, whatever. But I feel like if you cut your teeth in South America and you knew what it was about, then I think you could hang in there. I think that our teams maybe wouldn't compete with the Brazils and Argentinas, but we could compete, but doesn't necessarily we're going to, we could steal some points. I don't know if we're going to, let's say, top them in the table per se, given what they have currently. But I think we could scrape and get in there. I mean, Chile hasn't looked great, but they're hanging around in 5th with 16 points, and Peru's been scraping through. I think what we do pretty well, CONCACAF and CONCACAF teams, we know how to scrape and fight and hang around. And then obviously when it comes to Europe, where are you drawn? Who are you drawn in with? Some of the top nations, it might be difficult, but we've seen some of them falter. I mean, Italy and Portugal are two good examples of teams that have faltered despite their tremendous wealth of talent that they have in their squads, and Italy coming off winning the Euros. And that's a difficult question. I mean,
I know it's a little bit of a loaded question. It is.
But it's fun to think about, to be honest.
You can't simulate draws. You can't simulate who, when, and where and why. It's a little bit harder.
Well,
I do think that I do think that Copa Centenario showed, and again, completely different rosters, completely different squads. But I think the U.S. and I think Mexico have shown an ability to compete in CONMEBOL. I think Canada on paper should be able to compete in CONMEBOL and fall somewhere in there. Again, maybe they finished 9th. I don't know. But I do think that they could compete. They wouldn't be played off the pitch or from the very beginning go, hey, fish out of water here. I think you adjust. It's kind of an adapt or die type of scenario that we're building in our head. So I mean,
it's one of those questions too, and maybe that's a little bit apples and oranges, but when somebody says, well, an MLS team would never survive in the Premier League, I'm like, what? Of course they would, because they would have the money to actually go buy players to compete in that particular league. So when you have a budget and an owner has the money to spend, whereas in MLS there's a salary cap and there's a lot of rules that restrict a lot of crazy spending, or if you got to spend right, and that's changing, and everybody's getting a little bit smarter with regard to the rules and how to use them. But it's just so apples to oranges. Now that's more salary related. And this with national teams is a little bit different because there's really no salary attached. It's just about how good you are as a country. It's interesting. I feel like the one I would be nervous about is Africa, because I feel like you can make mistakes in other regions and probably still have an okay, like you can make a mistake or two and still get through. CONCACAF, CONMEBOL, Europe, for the most part, Europe, Italy, I only gave up 2 goals and still found a way to not qualify, which is crazy because they set a record for an unbeaten streak and they won the Euros, and that's wild. But for the most part, I think you can make a mistake or two and still have a chance. I feel like in Africa, you can't. You can't make a mistake in Africa, otherwise you're out. And that region would be a bit dicey for me, to be honest.
Yeah, I agree with that. Hey, listen, everyone, we're going to take a quick break, but when we come back, Jimmy and I are going to do our all-time USMNT best 11s, and we're going to keep those comments and conversations going. So if you're watching this in video form, stay right here. If you're listening to this on audio, we'll be right back. All right, everyone, we are back. Just as I mentioned, Jimmy and I would never lie to you. When we say we're coming back, we're coming right back. And here we are. Jimmy, it is time. And obviously, if there's any questions that people still have or comments from what we were talking about earlier with qualifying, we'll make sure we get to those and keep those coming in as well. But Jimmy, it's time for our best 11s, all-time best 11s for the U.S. men's national team.
Let's do one line at a time. One line, me, and then you, and then me, and then you, and then me.
Okay. Just for everyone's reference, Jimmy, have you seen mine? I sent mine directly to Des, so you can be inspired. Okay, good.
No, I haven't seen yours. And
I needed that disclaimer before we got started. So let's start with the back line. Jimmy,
no goalkeeper.
Yeah, we'll start with goalkeeper. Yeah.
Okay, goalkeeper.
Who do you have in goal?
I went with Tim Howard.
Oh, okay. Why is that?
It's tough. I obviously
life's about decisions. It is.
I'm making decisions here.
Let's go.
It's just Brad Friedel for me probably deserves more credit for our 2002 run to the quarterfinals than maybe any other player. He was tremendous. Saved the penalty against South Korea. Like, just was the guy making key saves. And you need that. If you're going to have any run in a competition, club or country, you got to have a hot goalkeeper. And Brad Friedel was that guy in that competition. Casey Keller, who I played with in a World Cup and also the Copa America. How long did it take me to flex? 38 minutes. Ooh, and his record in a World Cup, 6 World Cup games Casey Keller started. 0 wins, 5 losses, 1 draw. As much as I have a ton of respect for Casey Keller, and he's had a tremendous club career as well, that's not a player that I can put in my all-time list if you can't win at least 1 World Cup game out of 6. And when I was with him at the Copa America in 2007,
Jimmy. I mean, talk about your back line. You did it, not him.
Well, you know? That's potential. There's an argument to be made there. And in the Copa America that I played with him, we didn't win any games when we were there either. So it's
we played Paraguay, Argentina, and Colombia.
It was a tough group, dude. It was a tough group. We got screwed on the order too.
Hard.
I mean, it would have been nice if we played Paraguay first instead of Argentina. But anyway, so I played a lot of big games with them, and both of us haven't come away with wins. So it's not just him, as you say. But yep. I feel like Tim Howard, when you take into his club contributions, he's got more clean sheets than Peter Schmeichel and Van de Sar all time in the Premier League. He really came into his own under Everton. He was tremendous in the 2014 World Cup against Belgium in particular, where I think he made 85 saves. So I feel like Tim Howard's got the slight nod for me there, but I wanted to give some love to those other guys. And, you know, who knows? There might be a goalkeeper that surpasses him in the future. But for right now, I think Tim Howard's got the slight edge over Brad Friedel.
Yeah, I went with Brad Friedel, again, based on that 2002 World Cup. I also based on the fact that he had and may still have the longest consecutive matches record in the Premier League history at like 300 and something when he was benched against Spurs at one point. But just an incredible, well-respected goalkeeper that did it for a very, very long time, both at the Premier League level as well as for the national team, taking us to our farthest point ever in our history and all the things that you mentioned before. So I went with Brad Friedel. And who do you have in your back line?
So I'm going to start with right back. I'm going Steve Cherundolo.
Same.
I think that he's one of the most underrated players we have. And I actually should add a disclaimer to everybody that's listening or watching. I didn't go with any current players. And I think it's really easy to say, well, Sergiño Dest plays at Barcelona and Weston McKennie plays at Juve and Christian Pulisic's wearing the number 10 shirt. It's a Champions League winner for Chelsea. And yes, that is tremendous. And I'm curious if you put any current players in. But all of these current players haven't qualified for a World Cup yet. They will. They haven't yet. And they actually haven't played in a World Cup yet. And I think that matters. When you're being considered as an all-timer, you have to compete and perform in a World Cup. That's just my humble opinion with regard to that. These guys will get there. I'm not saying that they won't. I'm not trying to be like, well, back in my day. No, 100%. These guys are going to get there, and they're probably going to surpass all these players that we're mentioning. And I think that's what we want. We want all these players to be better than we were. At least that's what I want. But I couldn't put any of them in yet. So I'm just going to – I should have said that earlier with Tim Howard, but now I'm going to say it here. So Steve Cherundolo is my right back. I got Eddie Pope. Now, Eddie Pope played in 2 World Cups for us, and I adored Eddie Pope. I used to watch him play. So when I got to play with him in the national team.
I got Eddie Pope as well.
Okay, so we got Cherundolo, who's vastly underrated and super smart and just knew the game and made the game easier for everybody. He was always in the right position. I mean, the guy knew how to hold a line like I've never believed. I mean, the guy was amazing.
To be fair, I will say that he held his line too high when I played against him in the Bundesliga. I got on a breakaway and should have beat his goalkeeper. He got lucky and went out for a corner. And then the other time when I played against him, and I learned a little bit of this cheating in the Bundesliga, I had a run to the near post, and it was all condensed, and I had a free look at the near post. Like, I should have scored 2 against him at home. And I got this shove in the back that I've never gotten in my entire life, where I had him beat, and he shoved me so hard that I missed this header. And I remember thinking, like, how is this not a penalty? But he, like you said, he was just so intelligent of a player. Crafty. He was cheeky. He was so consistent. He was the one that even when I used to look to him as a mentor of saying, hey, sometimes I get trapped on my left foot and I can only see up the field. I don't know what to do. And he'd be like, hey, that's why you got to train your right foot. You cut it back to your right foot. This is what I do. I cut it back when I'm on the right side. I cut it back to my left foot, and I clip a switch to the other side with my opposite foot. And that's the only thing I train, because I know that if I go through my check downs of where the options are, that's my last option. That's how I get out. And I was like, man, this is amazing. You think that as a player, you figure that out. But having somebody like that is just, in my mind, was like, oh man, he simplified the game for me and added another thing to my game. So anyways, keep going.
No. So I want to give an honorable mention to Big Cat Tony Santa, who's been a longtime friend and who was a mentor for me when I came into the national team. I thought he was very good, especially in the 2002 World Cup. Frankie Hayduk probably deserves an honorable mention too for being absolutely batshit crazy, and we love him for it. And just a tireless engine in terms of how to still be successful when you have a work rate and how difficult it is. Like I remember when I don't say he pocketed Luis Figo in the 2002 World Cup, but he was a pest, and like how valuable that can be to have a player like that in your team. So I think those guys in there, but Cherundolo for me still has a little bit more. Eddie Pope for me is in the middle, and I would go with, it's a bit of a throwback because I wanted to give a nod to some of the older guys, but Marcelo Balboa was another inspiration for me growing up. And 2 World Cups for him. Almost scored the greatest goal in World Cup history for the U.S. with a bicycle kick in the 94 World Cup that just missed. So you know, this is a little bit more of a bias, but he was a big inspiration for me as a kid. And so I was very excited to have the opportunity to put him in this list. Now, Oguchi Onyewu, I thought was solid in different ways. You know, we have Kai saying that John Anthony Brooks should get more respect. Still another player that actually hasn't played. He played in a World Cup and scored against Ghana. That's right. He played in 2014, but wasn't really our featured player at that particular time. And that's a bigger conversation about John Brooks. We'll have plenty of time to get into that as this qualifying window keeps going on and on and on. But I feel like Balboa and Pope are my center backs, and then I have Carlos Bocanegra as my left back. I thought about putting Beasley there, but I like him a little higher up the field.
Yeah.
So I'm going to go with Bocanegra as my left back.
It's funny because when I was building it, I was like, I need to get Alexi Lawless or Balboa somewhere in this lineup. Alexi, I remember very specifically as like still images in my head, but less so as moments of play. So it was harder for me to think back of like consistently in the national team. Is he my guy that I'm going with? Marcelo Balboa, I have a lot more memories of as a player, but I went with Cherundolo, Eddie Pope, just because of the fact that of just the, I have a little bias. Yeah. And I have a little bias towards him as a teammate, him as a person, him as everything that he's done and would do for the people around him. So I have him on that as well. Oh, we got Jimmy Conrad's full list up here right now. And so Jimmy's got Eddie Pope, Marcelo Balboa. So Jimmy, what I had mentioned, what I had switched was Carlos Bocanegra at center back, because I was like,
okay, that's fair.
Carlos is probably the reason I didn't go to a World Cup, because he could play left back, but he wasn't a left back. And I know he did at times in a 3 or a 4 at Fulham and things like that in a bind. But then I had DeMarcus Beasley, and DeMarcus Beasley was a hard one for me, because if you go DeMarcus Beasley 2002 to 2007 or 8, there was very few players more exciting to me than him in terms of his ability at the national team level, including, just the type of player that he was. At this point is when he went to the semifinals of a Champions League. He was our superstar, right? And far more of an impactful person and player on the field and off than Landon Donovan at this point. Obviously, Landon having 2002 as well. And so I wanted to find Beasley, to put Beasley somewhere on the field, but I knew I'd have to sacrifice Clint or Landon. And I was trying to figure out where do I go with this. So I put Beasley at my left back position, knowing that. Okay. And the only reason I think it's okay is because the second half of his career, he was mostly a left back. Like the last 7 or 8 years, he was put at left back and sort of told to figure it out.
But people missed out, because that's not peak Bees. I mean, Bees was
Bees was an insane left midfielder. Insane.
So I'll get
short-lived for me. That's
but I like your back line. I had similar. Do I put Carlos, who I played with in college, by the way, so we've known each other for a very long time, at center back, and then leave? Because when I played in the World Cup, flex again, he played at left back, and I was next to Oguchi Onyewu, and Cherundolo was our right back. So there may be some bias here of playing. Now, where's Waldo's a good shout? Where's Eric Winalda? It was tough. I thought that Clint Dempsey maybe provided a little bit more when we were already looking at my team now. DeMarcus Beasley's my left wing. Landon Donovan's on the right side for me. Fight me if you think those are wrong choices. There's not much. They got to be on the field in some capacity. They have done some good things. Tab Ramos, though, is another old guy that had some sauce. And people don't really know much about Tab. He would have similar, I think, to Christian Pulisic in some ways, with a little dash of Gio Reyna, that he could hold the ball, that he could, make that pass that unlocks the defense. Tab Ramos is another player that will be super underrated in the history of our program, and I wanted to give him a shout. Claudio Reyna, I love John O'Brien, but Claudio Reyna played in 4 World Cups for us. Obviously, he's producing kids that are going to be playing in World Cups for us. There's a lot to like about Claudio Reyna. I loved him because he could play on the ball under any situation. He could play out of it. Landed on the right. The tough one with Eric Winalda was, I thought if I'm going to go with a kind of a wild card personality guy that can win a game by himself, I'd rather go with Clint Dempsey than Eric Winaldo. It was really between those two. And then Brian McBride, I feel like you need a player that can hold the ball up, that really grit, determination personified. That guy broke his face I don't know how many times, his nose, his cheekbones, and all kinds of stuff. And didn't matter. He'd get up and keep getting after it, whether it was for club or country. And obviously we could have a nice fun argument about a lot of these players, but this is my 11. I'm curious what yours is looking like.
Yeah, we can throw them. Actually, if yours is still on, let me ask you a couple of these questions.
Shoot.
When you were building this team, were you building it with actual shape or just best positional player based on 4-4-2 or because I don't see players that were in contention for me, which were like your Michael Bradley, your Jermaine Jones, who I thought was really impactful at the national team level. Thinking about Kobe Jones, I'm thinking about
most caps
John O'Brien. Players like that where you're like, Josie is an argument in terms of caps, but you and I have different perspectives of having played with them, having watched them, having analyzed them, different generations and things like that. So was there anybody who was the hardest person for you to leave off? I guess
that's a good question. I mean, we're looking at the lineup now. I'd probably have a diamond in midfield. So Tab Ramos would probably be a little bit higher. Claudio Reyna would be sitting. Claudio, maybe not the straight defensive workhorse that Michael Bradley would be. I mean, I played with Pablo Mastroianni, who I loved and who's crushing it right now.
With him too, man. He
just covers a lot of ground and he does a lot of the dirty work, a lot of thankless work, and he loves to do it, and a different type of player than Michael Bradley per se, who I think was maybe a hybrid and could maybe go forward with a little bit more danger. Like Pablo, just like, I'm going to sit and I'm going to do my job to the best that I can in this space. And that made him as a center back very predictable. Like I knew what he was going to do and how he was going to approach the ball. Whereas I think at times Michael could be, it's more of a risk taker, I think, from that spot, because he does have the IQ to know this is a good time for me to join the attack and bomb in late. I'm a fan of Michael's game for sure. I ultimately went with players that I had played with because I've seen what they can do at the highest levels under pressure. And you can speak to Michael a little bit more than I can. He wasn't that hard for me to leave out. It was more about maybe almost leaving Pablo Mastroianni out, but I would say Claudio Reyna. John O'Brien was a tough one to leave out as well, just because he has so much quality to his game. But I just thought Claudio over a 4 World Cups is that really speaks to, his ability and his consistency. And I just thought that made sense.
Oh, Dan is saying Weah and Aronson would run circles around these guys. I mean, that I fully disagree with at this point in time. And at any point, I think Weah and Aronson have the potential to be better than some of these guys. But this idea that Weah and Weah, who's had a good run of games, he's not even a starter at Lille half the time. And he's young and he's got incredible potential. And he was really good in the last camp with the national team, but go back other camps before that, and he's still trying to find his way. So I think that there's still some work to be done there. But the upside for Weah, who was a young player at PSG, I think is incredible. Jimmy, I have one more question before we go to
yours.
But
I do want to say really quick that's a part of the. And I'm not saying this is a bad thing. I love all the new fans that are really kind of getting around the U.S. men's national team, but I mean, ultimately, I want to say it like this because I don't want to stir the pot because we're all on the same page. I want Aronson and Weah to be able to run circles around these guys.
Oh yeah,
that would be amazing if we had that type of quality. But I think that really discounts how good these players that we're talking about are or were, and because those are some really, really good players that fight their asses off to get to where they got. And I don't think they would make it an easy game for Brendan Aronson. Especially, I can imagine Pablo Mastroianni. If Brendan Aronson was running around him, dude, he'd 2-foot him up the ass as fast as he possibly could and be like, yo, pipe down, little guy. You got a nice little engine, but let's see if you actually get the ball and do anything with it, And I just don't, is that the tough guy, old guy thing? I don't know. That's just how Pablo played, but even when he was younger, but I don't think it would be as easy as it maybe seems because the hype around the team's a little bit different.
Well, you're seeing that in qualifying now, right? You're looking at the worst that Honduras has ever been, El Salvador. You're looking at Costa Rica, the worst they've ever been. You're looking at, in terms of historically over the last 10, 15 years, this national team is not playing well against most of these teams. They're finding ways to get results, which I think is amazing. They're showing their potential, which I think is amazing. They're younger than any team we've ever had, which I think is even more amazing and plays to what you said, Jimmy, that we hope that they get to the point where they're running circles around these guys. It's just not that easy. And it's incremental. Mm-hmm. And the biggest difference is the fact that you're looking at these players probably matching up with the peak years of our national team players, and now have an ability in the next 4 or 5 years to surpass that for sure. It's just that you're seeing 21, 22, 23 being the same as our 28, 29, and 30-year-olds. And now they have the ability to go over the next 5 years to be incredible and by above and beyond what any player had done in our generation so far. And by the way, this group that we have now in the national team is nothing compared to what our 2000s are going to be, and what these players in 2005s, the 2005 class, the 2007 class, like there's some insane players that are going to come through that I've got an eye on, that I know some players out of Philadelphia that are beating teams around the world, and U12s, U13s, beating the best youth academies in the world by far. So there's still generations that we hope.
I can't wait. I can't wait
to go past.
I hope they're 10 times better than you and I, Heath. That's for sure.
Yeah. I mean, not better than us, but other players.
Yeah, of course.
For sure. All right, let's bring up my 11.
Let's see yours. Let's see your lineup.
So my back line was similar to yours, Jimmy. If this graphic comes up eventually, I'm not seeing. There it is.
There it is.
So similar in that I had Steve.
Ooh, you went in midfield 3. I like that.
Yeah, I went midfield 3 because I wanted, and this one was hard, right? There's a little controversy in John O'Brien, and this was what my last question I was going to ask you on your 11 was, before I go into all this, who was the best player that you played with that fizzled out, whether injuries, whether attitude, whether mentality, that you were like, this is the greatest player. Like if you played with them that day, you would have been like Concacaf or USMNT best 11, no doubt. And then didn't end up making that. Was there one player at the national team level or club level that was American? I'm thinking about players like Preki and stuff like that. When I think through just the quality of a player, and again, I know we're leaving off a bunch of players from older generations that were really, really good players that perhaps didn't have the cool hair like Kobe and Alexi, that were incredible players or from a different generation that didn't make it. But was there one that you were like, because that's who I'm talking about with John O'Brien, obviously great in the 2002 World Cup, didn't have the career, retired before 30, was our first player. I've got the jersey of him at Ajax. Like he was one of these players that really inspired me. But is there somebody that, whether it was injuries, attitude, or otherwise, that you were like, this is the best player I've ever seen? Like they're incredible, and now don't make your list because they didn't make it?
Yes. So John O'Brien's a great shout. I had the benefit of growing up in the same area as John O'Brien. I'm a couple years older than him, but we heard about this kid who was a little guy who could just ball it up. And when he went over to Ajax to first train, I think at 16, he wasn't allowed to sign with them yet because they had to wait till he was 18.
Yeah.
But he kept going back to train with them as much as he possibly could, or was allowed within the rules. But he grew up in my area, like 15 minutes from where I grew up, and we heard about him and we got to see him play. And he just was a cut above. And it was very clear that he needed to go somewhere else to continue to blossom. So he's one for sure, because I played with him in 06 at the World Cup. He just didn't seem mentally like where he was in 2002. And he's gone on to be a clinical psychologist or whatever. He just got his doctorate. So fair play to John O'Brien there, and thinking about that side of the game, the mental side of it. And I'm excited to see what the rest of his career looks like. That's him. He's for sure. Clint Mathis would be another one.
Yeah. He was sick.
Clint Mathis was sick, but his attitude ran him into some issues. There was a famous story. I think he was at Hanover with Steve Cherundolo, and he was pissed that he wasn't starting. And he comes on, and within 3 or 4 minutes, he scores a banger of a goal. And he walks over to the coach and pointed at his like make-believe watch on his thing, like, you should have put me in sooner. And it didn't last very long there, but that's amazing. What a story. Clint Mathis, unreal. And had he stayed healthy and stayed fit and played at the level like he did at 2002 and could have maintained that for a longer period of time, we definitely would be in our top 11. Eddie Johnson's another one. I played against him in 2005, the January camp, my first ever camp in the national team. He had just gotten back from like 2 or 3 weeks at Manchester United, and I could not defend the guy. And at this point, I was getting close to the peak of my career, like, winning awards, individual awards, and national team, blah, 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 blah. And I had seen some good players already, and this guy, I couldn't defend him. And at that point, I was like, he's better than Landon Donovan at this particular moment. That camp, he was unbelievable. And then he hurt his toe. And after that camp, he actually went down to Trinidad for a World Cup qualifier, and he scored, I think he scored 2. So he had scored 6 goals in 6 games, and that's when he got $1 million contract. He was making $80 grand playing for Dallas Burn. He ends up killing it, 6 goals in 6 games for the U.S. team. And then he gets this $1 million deal, which I think, messed up his head a little bit. And like, people that were no longer in his life were coming back into his life, and that's going to throw you off. And I love Eddie Johnson, but
he went through agent changes.
Oh, dude, money, it was crazy. And then he hurt his toe.
Crazy over
he got turf toe. And turf toe is a really weird injury to diagnose and to know when you're 100%. And that threw him off as well. So he had a lot of downtime along with a lot of money. And I don't feel like he ever, even though he was on the 06 World Cup team with me, I don't feel like he ever really regained that special year or two that he had. And he showed flashes of it. He was with me in Kansas City when he scored 16 goals in 15 games or something. And then we sold him to Fulham. But he never really kind of, like, he just didn't keep taking those steps up, and up. And I just think that was more off the field distractions than on the field. And it's sad because he had so much talent. And he was 2 foot, unbelievable. So I feel like if Eddie Johnson could have maintained that, Clint Mathis, we'd be talking about a much different best 11.
When I think about the best player naturally on the ball that I ever played with on the national team, that could have been above and beyond DeMarcus Beasley, and again, light years apart in terms of where they finished up, was Justin Mapp. Justin Mapp, I was in residency with him and Eddie Johnson. Mike McGee was another one that had just this natural ability to just punish you, could score from anywhere, made the game look really, really easy. But Justin Mapp, when he was on the dribble, and I remember, Jimmy, I think you were probably, I would guess that you would have been in this camp when we played Denmark in a January camp.
Yeah, I was captain.
Yeah. So I came on at halftime of that game. Ended up getting Kenny Cooper an assist on, I think it was his first goal when he ran from the half line and was going all the way down the field. But there was a moment in that game when Justin Mapp gets the ball on the left-hand side, dribbles across the field. This is when Johnny Bornstein's at left back. So you have your left midfielder, left back. Your left midfielder gets the ball, dribbles across the field to the right-hand side, dribbles past 2 or 3 people to get down to the touchline. This is your left midfielder. Then your left back has now decided to bomb forward. You've now got your left midfielder crossing from the right side and your left back making a run to the near post on the right side. And they cross to each other and score. And I remember thinking about this. And Justin Mapp was hurt a lot. He was very fragile in terms of falling. I remember playing in a youth national team game where he broke his wrist. He was just one of these guys that just was always going to get hurt because of the way that he played. It was always a situation where a player around him thought they were going to get the tackle and he was going to get there first and chop it away and you were going to take him out clean. But his ability on the ball was one that I was just like, this is insane. I've never seen somebody like this in terms of their talent on the ball that glides past people. He's never looking at the first person, except for against Argentina in Copa America when he got completely shut down. That was the first time against Argentina when
Javier Zanetti was
and Verón would come over to double him and be like, no, thanks. I got this guy in my pocket. And I was like, okay, there's levels to this stuff. And I remember that game specifically because it was the first time I saw somebody as good as I saw him get completely neutralized by a team that was just like, yeah, one guy comes over, the next one comes over. But anyways, back to my 11 on this one. I had John O'Brien in there just because I wanted to give a shout out to somebody who I thought had greatness, but perhaps not the longevity, because you can measure it based on club and national team and attributes. Same as like the Ballon d'Or, where you're like, you could pick and choose from a number of things that make them great. So John O'Brien made it. Claudio Reyna made it. It was also just an idol of mine. I remember seeing him follow my very first cap against
Charlie Davies is not a bad shout either.
Charlie Davies was one too, where, kind of like what could have been, Charlie Davies was one also. No.
Yeah, I was in camp when that accident happened. That was scary, but go ahead.
Yeah, no, I remember hearing about it. But yeah, I didn't get called into that camp, but I remember Charlie being one where Charlie was not good enough to be in the national team when he was there before. You could see flashes, but he had no idea how to play soccer. And then one day, it just happened. And this is a kid that came from college where he was scoring a ton of goals. The youth national team, a ton of goals. This was a guy that you're like, you can see the potential, but he couldn't figure it out. And then one day he figured it out. And he became this workhorse monster that did all the dirty work and was willing to score goals by just outrunning you, out chasing you, and whatever. And then when he rounded that corner, you were like, oh, wow, this guy's got something, right? It reminded me of our own version of a Chicharito in terms of his energy. Just willing to run the channels, willing to do the dirty work, scrap for goals. Anything that was in the box, he was going to put his head where you wouldn't put your foot type of thing. So that's a great shout as well. And then, and then I needed to get Landon on there. I needed to get Clint on there. And they're always one where I'm like, if somebody was like, which one would you rather have? And Jimmy, I want to know this from you. Which player from an old generation would you bring into this national team now that you'd like to see fit in with this squad? Is there one single player?
Well, it would be cool to see Clint Dempsey play with these guys, maybe as our 9, and kind of bang with the big boys. He's always good at just challenging, being difficult to play against, throwing elbows and whatever he does to create space. And having those guys to play with and combine with, I think would be pretty neat. Same with Landon. I mean, one of Landon's, I remember there was a game we played in MLS and Landon made this great run. His timing of his run was fantastic and he was playing up high and he had me. It was such a well-timed run, but the player in particular just didn't see it or wasn't good enough to play the ball. And when he came back onside and was next to me, I'm like, yeah, you can make those runs all day, baby, but your team isn't good enough to make the passes. And we just had a good laugh. But I feel like this team is littered with maybe some more players that would really bring out more of Landon's strengths, you know? So it'd be kind of cool to see Clinton Landon. But if we're talking about straight needs, I get the sense that Brian McBride would be a really fascinating player to bring into this. I feel like center back, I think we got that covered. Goalkeeper, I'm feeling good there. Outside back, Anthony Robinson. Chirundalo sure would probably add to this, but I think we're going to be okay in that position. Chirundalo could be a shout. We got kind of midfield covered. Obviously adding to Claudio to play with his son would be weird and awesome at the same time. But John O'Brien would be sick as well. Like all these guys could fit in, but McBride being able to hold the ball up for us and allowing our team to transition, this current team, in a meaningful way. Not to say that Pepe doesn't do it or whoever else is up there, but McBride was a different gravy, man. And he'd finish crosses in a way. And in some ways, maybe Pepe is like McBride or has some McBride tendencies because they're a bit both, long and gangly and get on the end of crosses and find space. But I don't know. That's kind of who I'm thinking in terms of necessity, but it would be kind of cool to see some of our older players have a chance to play with this current squad, us included, to be honest.
Yeah, I agree. And would love anybody who's watching this to give who you think from an older generation would fit in well and that you would love to see compete with this group. Because again, one of the things that when you were mentioning Bees at his best was insane. Oh my gosh. He was just, I remember he came when he just signed Project 40. He came back and trained with us. Our next group was in the residency. He was in 82 and I was with the 84s. And he came back in and he used to give all of his shoes away to all of us. And we were like, dude, this guy's so cool. And he gave guys like his silver chains, and guys got like really cool things from him. And he was just so gracious.
Yeah, it's very gracious.
Like fanning over him. But he would get the ball and dribble past 6 or 7 of us in training. And we're the youth national team, right? And at this point, we are the quote unquote best 18, which is probably not even close. But that's, due to scouting. We were the ones that were selected. And he would dribble past us just to dribble past us, just to dribble back past us again. I was like, oh my gosh, this guy is an 82. We're 84. It's just 2 years difference. And we can't get near this guy. Like he is so much better than any of us. And then when I got into the national team with him and you watched him, his ability to just beat players. Again, another one of these guys that was like, the first guy he's running out is like, nah, he's like, okay, I'm beating you. I'm seeing what I'm going to do when I have to get to somebody or when I get double teamed. And he was just so quick and explosive that I wish with Bees it would have lasted another 10 years, but obviously starting when he's 16 years old, he did a solid decade plus of elite level. And then he was just around so long that I only remember the late years where he was a left back and didn't have that same sort of explosive pace. And his game evolved. But yeah, definitely one that I would love to see go back. And anyway, the point that I was getting at with before was go back to 2018 cycle, the pressure that Christian Pulisic had having to carry the whole team at 18 years old or whatever he was, 18, 19, whatever, is different now than if he has these players around him. We talk about the fact that like, oh, Christian Pulisic injured, no problem. We've got quality players that we think can do things. And I wonder what it would be like if there was a Landon that I didn't look at Landon like when I go down to Honduras or Panama and I go, man, I need you to carry this team right now because this is a scary place. We need points. We need to get out of here. And what it would be like if he had more quality players around him. And we had quality players, but more quality players around him to bring out the best in him. When you use the example of Ricardo Pepe, when he just laid that ball off to Christian to get involved in that Honduras game, you go, oh, okay, what would it be like with Landon or Bees there? And what kind of combination play? It could be truly magical, something that we had never seen. So yeah, it's just an exciting thought for me of combining generations.
Yeah, I saw Gary say Tab Ramos, which that would be fun to see, and Pablo Mastroianni, who we both love. So yeah, Gary, you got fans of us of Pablo as well, and Tab, both fantastic players. And it's hard for a current generation or a new fan of the U.S. men's national team to really appreciate just how good these guys are. And that's what we're here to do, is try to bridge that gap. Yes, we have some really incredible, talented players now. There's some that are upcoming you haven't even heard of yet. But there's also back in the day some really special players too that could hold their own easily with this group of players.
Yeah, and what's crazy, the craziest about it before we close this out is that these players all came from like backyard soccer. None of them came from an academy environment. Landon being probably the only one, John O'Brien as well, that were in professional environments at a young age. Most of these guys, you go back to Kobe's age, college, and then part-time, and then trying to figure it out, and then the launching of a league. yourself. I mean,
Mhm.
I was in residency where you trained every day, but you didn't ever play any relevant games like you do everywhere else in the world, or if you're in academy now. You were training 2-3 days a week, I'm sure, Jimmy, when you were young, mostly on your own if you wanted to fill in the rest of the days. But it's probably some dad as the coach and, not that serious. And to see the players get to that
Evolution.
height when the rest of the world is training in professional environments, I think is a credit to the quality and potential that we have in the U.S. But just love bringing this all together. But Jimmy, that is it, man. I could do this all day. You could do this all day. We're going to keep this thing going by saving more for later, get people hooked on this whole thing like a drug, and then get them coming back every single Monday for the USMNT Hour. But everyone, we thank you so much for your comments, your questions, your concerns, your hot takes, everything that you bring to these conversations makes it so much more fun for Jimmy and I. Jimmy Conrad, thank you so much for your insights. And obviously, bridging the gap of these generations is so much fun. We're excited to see where this all goes. And hopefully the U.S. doesn't finish fourth in World Cup qualifying, where we have to play against the winner of Oceania. And like we said, every single Monday, we have the USMNT Hour for Jimmy and I. There's plenty more Qué Golazo pod happening throughout the week. So make sure you tune in. Keep those notifications on so that you receive those videos or audio as soon as they go out. Leave a comment, a rating, and a review. And until next time, peace out from Jimmy, myself, and our producer, Des Norris.